Please leave a comment where in the world you are listening from. A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside the suburbs. It seemed like the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors close enough not to feel isolated. The area had no street lights, so it was very dark at night, especially if there were clouds blocking the moonlight. It didn't bother me though. It made my little house feel even more quaint on dark nights. I got home from work one day in midwinter. It was a cloudy night, so pulling up to my house, I saw only what my headlights and front porch light illuminated. When I got out of my car, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. That was odd, as I had never smelled that before around that house. I didn't see anyone nearby, so I ignored it and went inside. I had just got off a shift with a few hours of overtime, so I felt pretty tired. Even though it wasn't even 7 yet, I decided to take a shower and call it a night. I woke up sometime later sure that I had heard a noise inside my house. I wasn't worried right away, because my friend would sometimes stop by to use my shower after work on his way to his night classes. I even gave him a spare key, so he could stop by even if I wasn't home. He would always text me to let me know beforehand though, and I hadn't heard my phone go off. I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from my phone's screen and number pad blinded me. These were the days before phones had a light sensor that would dim the screen in the dark, and this particular phone was so bright I could use it as a flashlight. Through squinted eyes, I could make out that it was 9-something, but I couldn't tell if I had an unread text or not. I set my phone aside and called out my friend's name. There were a couple of seconds of silence before I heard loud footfalls as someone started running through the bottom floor of my house. I leapt out of bed and ran to the closet. They were already up the stairs by the time I had opened the door and stepped inside. That house had 3 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one I was in and a spare, and a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were both closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway past my door and into the bathroom. Thank God he did. That gave me enough time to open the attic access in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up. I had just started to lift myself up when the person ran back out of the bathroom. My feet were barely inside of the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps run into my room and stop. When they didn't see me in that room, they ran back to the hallway and into the other room, which just had boxes stacked in a corner, some weights, and a table where I painted my miniature models. I guess they decided that if someone were hiding, it would be in the bedroom, because they charged back into my room and turned on the light. A moment later, the closet door was ripped open. I was crouched in my attic just a foot or so away from the access, so I could try to stop them if they started to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see was from about their knee down. They were wearing dirty blue jeans with frayed cuffs and worn work boots. After a few seconds of looking in the closet, they stepped away, and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. That scream was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. He would eventually be put in a mental hospital for several mental disorders that resulted in erratic and violent tendencies. The man in my house ran back down the stairs. I heard crashes and clatters as things were thrown around and furniture was knocked over. I stayed crouched in the attic. I had left my cell phone when I ran for the closet, and I wasn't certain I could climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noises stopped. I started counting slowly. When I reached 1,000, I decided it was safe enough to climb down and call the police. The first thing I noticed when I exited the closet was the intruder had flipped my bed over. I assume in an attempt to find me. That was the loud noise I had heard after he stepped away from the closet. I couldn't find my cell phone, so I went to the landline by the bed and called the police. I waited in my room until I heard them call out from downstairs. The first floor was a mess, but I had expected that. Chairs had been knocked over, the sofa had been flipped. All the books, pictures, and knickknacks I had on my shelves were strewn across the floor. The cupboards in the kitchen had been opened, and all the boxed and canned foods had been thrown to the ground. As far as I could tell, though, the only thing missing was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked the house from top to bottom. They found that the side door had been forced open by something like a crowbar. They also found a few cigarette butts along my fence line, along with some foil, and an empty pen tube, which the police said people often used to smoke meth, so they think he had been watching my house for a while. I realized that he must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected up the evidence and told me I should stay with family or friends that night and get that door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep. I moved a shelf over to block the broken door and spent the next couple hours cleaning things up. I would often go to the window with a flashlight and shine it along the fence line where the police found the cigarette butts and foil, but I didn't see anything. The next day I called to have the door fixed and motion lights installed at the back and sides of my house. I ran a phone cable up into the attic and added a landline. I never wanted to be stuck up there without a phone again. Nothing else happened at that house though. I lived there another 3 years without incident. One more precaution I took was practicing getting out of my bed, going to my closet, and climbing into the attic as quickly and quietly as possible. I even kept at it when I moved, except now I go to a crawl space at the back of the closet instead of the attic. I try not to think about what would have happened if I had been a bit slower getting to the attic, or if he hadn't gone into the bathroom at the end of the hall first. This incident happened to me over the Christmas holidays this past year, and it just occurred to me that the sheer insanity of it may make it a good fit for this sub. For reference, I'm a 24-year-old female. My cousin and I decided to go up a few hours north for a nice winter cabin weekend. It went great, nothing creepy at all. On our final day, we packed up at 6 a.m. and hopped in the car to get an early start on the 5-hour drive we had ahead of us. It was a foggy morning, not actively snowing, but previous snowfalls had piled up quite a bit, making the drive a little risky in the dark early hours of the morning. My cousin was driving, and we're chatting and listening to podcasts, not too aware of our surroundings. We were about 20 minutes into the drive when, unfortunately, the car skidded off the road a little. Damn you, black ice. And we very slightly grazed a tree. We got out to take a look, and by some miracle there was no damage or anything on the car. As my cousin and started to laugh with relief, we were just thanking our luck. I shield my eyes because of some idiot with their crazy high beams coming up behind us. So obnoxious, my cousin laughed, starting to open her door to step back in when the blinding headlights car honks and continues to keep at it as they approach us. My cousin and I looked at each other, super confused, but quickly hopped back in the car. The car begins to slow down, and we're able to see a man in the driver's seat, and he finally takes his hand off his horn and pulls up right next to my cousin's car, which is really dumb. BC, we were off-road, and it was crazy slippery. He rolls down his window and motions for my cousin to roll down ours. We figure it's fine because he's still inside his car and we're in ours. I know, probably still a stupid move. Hey there ladies, in a rush this morning, he laughs. I'm not really, just trying to get home. Can we help you with something? My cousin replies, totally stone cold poker face. Oh no, I just noticed you dropped something about 2 kilometers back. It fell out of your trunk. My cousin turned to look at me. Did you shut the trunk when we left? Yeah dude, obviously, I replied, and knowing the way the car is shaped, we would have seen and definitely heard an open trunk. No thanks sir, I think you might have us mixed up with someone, my cousin said, and immediately rolled up her window. This man just gave off bad vibes. He starts blaring his horn again and motioning for us to roll down the window. My cousin rolls it down again and sees him holding up some women's underwear and smiling. See? This look familiar? I can literally remember the exact tone with which he said that. No thanks, sir. You have a great day now. My cousin quickly rolled up her window again and floored it, quickly hopping back on the road, and thankfully the man was either taken aback or just gave up, and we didn't see him for the next hour or so. My cousin and I were both a little shaken up, but tried to laugh it off since we were safe and hadn't seen his car follow us or anything. About 2 hours into our trip, we got off at an exit to fill up gas and grab some breakfast at a Starbucks. My cousin and I mobile ordered, and I was going to quickly run in to grab our food and drinks. It had started snowing at this point, and while the sun had been up for a little bit, it was still foggy and gloomy, making it hard to see the surroundings. I ran in, and as I reached for our food, someone's arm reached over mine to grab a napkin, and I instantly flinched back. When I looked up, I truly almost shat myself. It was the fucking man. Despite him never getting out of the car, he did have his lights on, and I was able to get a clear view of his face. It was him, I was sure. Look at us. Just like old friends, he smiled at me. I immediately looked down, grabbed my food, and started walking out of the store. As I left, I heard him talking to the barista saying, "See that beauty queen? That's my beauty queen. WTF." I almost had tears in my eyes because I was so terrified. I power walked back to the car, almost tripping outside because I was so scared and not walking like a normal person. I hopped in and screamed, "We need to get the fuck back on the road. He's inside the fucking Starbucks." My cousin started laughing, thinking I was pranking her, but she quickly realized that was not the case when the man walked out of the Starbucks a few seconds later, with no drink or food in hand, walking straight towards our car, waving at us. My cousin quickly started to turn the car on when the man reached into his pocket. I genuinely thought he would pull out a weapon, holding up the underwear he had before. Thankfully, my cousin took no time in backing out of there and speeding back onto the highway. We both were freaking out at this point, not sure how he ended up at the same stop as us despite us not seeing him behind us at all. He could have taken some sort of back roads we didn't know about, but it would have taken him much longer than us to get there. Unless he was trailing behind? I don't know. We quickly tried to find an alternate route on our Maps app, and thankfully there was one that made us go through some local roads, which we hoped might help. Of course, with our luck, as we were going through a smaller town, I felt the car getting gradually lower on my side. We pulled over at a well-lit gas station and realized we were losing air in one of the tires. We were both too scared to get out, but figured if we went out together it might be less scary. So we did. We filled up the tire with some air, and it seemed to be okay. We got back in the car, back on our way. Everything seemed fine until 10 minutes later, when this car seemed to appear out of nowhere directly behind us. My cousin and I looked at each other, having no idea what to do if it were the man. Our suspicions were confirmed when he blared his stupid horn yet again, then quickly swerved off the road to get right next to us, WTF. So this time he was on my side. He had his window rolled down and was screaming at us. At this point I gave zero fucks and called my brother-in-law, who's a cop. I know I should have called the police directly, it was a stupid move, but in the moment I was trying to justify this as being not that serious. My bro-in-law told us to drive directly to the nearest police station and to call them right away so they would be alert. Literally as he was instructing me, the creep braked his car. Just stopped on the side of the snowy, icy road. We were still speeding away, so it quickly got harder and harder to see him. But from what I could make out, he had gotten out of his car and was sitting on the hood. Just fucking sitting on the hood of his car in freezing snowy weather. My cousin and I did not want to stop or do anything with about an hour left in our journey. We decided to just book it straight home, and thankfully that was the end of that. I know we made a lot of stupid mistakes that could have potentially had horrible consequences, but I'm super happy we made it out alive and unharmed. I still don't know how he caught up to us seemingly magically, and why he just sat there at the end, but I don't even want to find out at this point. First off, this is the only creepy/scary-ish thing that has ever happened to me in my life, which is probably why it stands out so much in my memory. In hindsight, the location and general isolation probably made it seem much scarier than it was, but at the time it felt like I'd stumbled into the opening scenes of a full-on horror film. Anyway, here's the story. So just over 10 years ago, I was fresh out of college and had moved back to my parents' house for the free rent/food for 9 months or so before I was leaving the state for graduate school. Now my parents are super chill and gave me my own space in the house, but being a 22-year-old single guy and living at a house in the sticks, they had just recently moved about 40 miles south of a major Midwest city, is certainly not ideal, but I didn't have any other options, so I started looking for some work more to pass the time than to save up some money. Anyway, so summer turned to winter, and I still hadn't found anything solid, but by then I desperately needed to spend more time out of my parents' house, so I took a part-time gig doing some light bookkeeping for a small business owner guy that my dad knew. I didn't really want to do it since it didn't pay much, was short-term, and wasn't even a real office setup, but again, since my parents lived in the middle of nowhere Midwest, think acres and acres of farms, I knew I had limited local opportunities to make some cash, and this guy was going to pay me under the table as well. About that same time, a friend of mine in the city said that if I just paid him $200 a month and helped clean up, he'd basically let me crash in his living room until I was ready to move out of state. That was all I needed to hear. I took the job. So my dad's friend's family had a construction-type business. They helped out with building stuff a little, but it was ultimately more focused on renting out a few bobcats and large augers they owned, also other various drills, and then odds and ends like generators and other low-level construction or farming equipment that someone in that area couldn't afford to purchase but needed to use from time to time. This was a small mom-and-pop type thing where everyone knew everyone, and the office only opened on days that when someone was coming by, and was just generally a mutually beneficial situation for the business owners and the locals. Since I had minored in a business-adjacent area, and my dad recommended me, they trusted me to go in there for about 15 to 20 hours a week and check and file the rental forms, make sure nobody missed a payment date if there was a payment plan in place, answer an email or two discussing prices and availability, etc. Super easy gig. The old building where I worked was about, I think, 90 years old and at the top of this little hill, and the downstairs used to be an old country bar until the 1970s when this family bought it cheap, cleared out the bar and fenced in the property to use its parking lot area to store all their rental equipment and gear. I could generally come and go as I pleased, work any hours I wanted to as long as the work got done. So if things were slow and there weren't any rentals for a couple days, I'd usually go in after 7 and stay until around midnight or 1, since I knew I'd be alone and could listen to music loud and take my time and all that. The office where I worked was on the second floor of the building above the old bar and looked out onto the long driveway. From my seat I could easily see out the window, and once or twice saw a family of deer or a raccoon scamper by, and I always glanced out when I saw movement since it was very noticeable. It was incredibly remote, very still and quiet, so if something unusual occurred or if something felt off, I definitely noticed it. One night during winter it had snowed a few inches, and my dad told me to stay in cause the roads were bad, but I had an old SUV, and more than that just really wanted to get out of the house. So I went into work at about 8 p.m. and was going to stay until just after 1. One night during winter it had snowed a few inches, and my dad told me to stay in cause the roads were bad, but I had an old SUV, and more than that just really wanted to get out of the house. So I went into work at about 8 p.m. and was going to stay until just after 1. I always left the gate open at the bottom of the hill, since believe me when I say that nobody ever showed up at night, since we were literally in the middle of nowhere. I think the nearest occupied house was about 2 miles down the road, and to even turn onto our short road, you had to only be coming to our specific building, and probably know it was there beforehand. It was a locals-only type thing and very small, since the family had inherited a lot of money, we're pretty sure, and kind of did this rental thing on the side. Basically, someone would never just get lost and end up at our building. So I'm jamming away to some Fall Out Boy. Everyone makes mistakes when they're young. And having some coffee and kept glancing at the snow outside here and there, since our one orangish street light reflected onto the ground at the gate and was causing the light to shine off the snow in a really cool, dare I say pretty way. At one point around midnight, I went downstairs to the big bathroom to do my bathroom business, and then came back upstairs and got settled back into my work. I probably did about 5 minutes of work when I glanced outside and saw a huge imprint of something in the fresh snow just below the light. It seemed like it must have been a huge dog or substantial animal had just rolled around on the ground there on its back or something. Since I didn't notice it just 15 minutes before, it had to have happened while I was in the bathroom, or maybe when my back was turned, since I would have seen that type of movement for sure. I shook it off and assumed a dog or maybe even a farm animal, this was common, was that type of area, had gotten loose and maybe was attracted to the light or something. Who knows? At around 2 in the morning I was leaving, and as always got out of my car to lock the gate up, and to be honest I had pretty much forgotten about the imprint in the snow, but when I looked down I was shocked to see that it wasn't just some disturbed snow, but it was undeniably the imprint of a human-made snow angel. If you don't know what a snow angel is, it's when kids lie on their back in the snow and push their arms and legs back and forth. So when they get up it looks like the outline of an angel. I used to do this when I was a kid, so I 100% knew for sure that's what this was. And it was deliberately made underneath the light post. But it wasn't from a kid, it was from a very large person, or at the very least, a normal-sized adult wearing tons of layers of big winter clothing. I looked up and saw what I already knew, that whoever had made this snow angel could easily look up and have seen me through that window, so they must have waited for me to head downstairs to make this angel. Now I definitely would have seen or heard if someone drove up to our building, even if I was in the bathroom, so I knew someone had to have walked deep into the freezing cold and snow for a few miles, stopped in front of our building, and then do a snow angel in the small amount of time I wasn't sitting in front of my desk window. I glanced around for tracks in the snow, and saw that there was one set that led to the nearby woods to the right of the building, so it was clear the person didn't use the road, but instead came from the opposite side, which made me instantly uneasy, since that side was just trees and darkness for miles and miles. I was definitely a little freaked out now once I realized that someone had just been this close to me secretly in the middle of the woods, and I looked around but didn't see anything amiss at all, and now just wanted to get the hell out of there. When I got back in my car and drove a few feet, I realized that my boss would be there in like 4 hours and might see the snow angel, and assume I did it since he probably assumed I kept the gate locked when I was there. It wouldn't have been that big of a deal at all, but I was young and felt like I might be made fun of by him if nothing else. They were all manly men, I liked books. So I opened the gate back up real quick, ran over and kicked the snow around so it hid the angel, locked it up again, and went back to my car. Also, I should note this is what really happened at this moment, but I almost lied here and said something else since it seems fake, since I assumed the average person wouldn't get back out of their SUV, and not just flee in their car because they'd be embarrassed about a snow angel. But at that time I was insecure and cared a lot about what others thought, so unfortunately this is what I did. Also, I wasn't exactly fully terrified at this point, even though it was certainly unsettling. I just thought it was really weird, and could have been an illegal hunter, even though hunting at night in the cold didn't make much sense. Either way, the imprint was made 2 hours earlier, and I assumed they were long gone. But that's when I heard it. When I was getting into my SUV, there was the loudest high-pitched laughing coming from the woods. It almost sounded like a fake laugh, like the witch in Wizard of Oz or something, like someone was doing it fake on purpose to show they weren't scared of me, or how I'd react at all once I knew they were there laughing at me on our property. It was close enough that I knew they could probably see me, but I couldn't see them at all since other than the street light I was under there was no illumination. After a few seconds of laughing, they stopped. And then it was just silence everywhere, except for my heart beating through my ears. Then the laughing started again, though louder this time, more like screaming and laughing combined. I sort of froze for just like 5 seconds, listening in a panic. Now I spent a lot of time in that area, and I know what coyotes and foxes sound like at night with their high-pitched screeches during mating season, so I can't completely logistically rule that out. But to me it honestly felt like it was an adult man trying to emulate a woman laughing, like someone was deliberately trying to make a fake scary shriek laugh in order to scare someone. Well, it fucking worked. After that 5 seconds, I immediately filled with adrenaline, got in my car and drove the hell away from there as fast I could without sliding off the road. Back at home, I was up all night trying to figure it out and told my parents the story when they woke up. After talking it out, we all decided it was one of two things. It was either my brain somehow convinced itself that the snow formation was angel-shaped, when it was really just caused by some animal, and then the snow tracks and laughing was just a coyote or red fox. Though I don't think that's what it was. What I truly believe, the second thing, which is that some local was out walking around for some reason and decided to mess with me. I didn't have any close friends left in that area that would do this, and if they did they would certainly have brought it up to make fun of me for speeding away in terror. I found out later that nearest house was a super old couple, so I highly doubt that it was one of them, which means whomever it was went out in the woods in the night in the freezing cold just to mess with a stranger. I don't have any mental issues or a family history of them. Didn't do drugs. I drank socially at that time, but certainly didn't that night. I also don't believe in the paranormal, so I never once gave that a thought. In my heart I know someone was out there. I worked there another 6 weeks or so and never had a single issue, though I knew where my boss kept his gun, and I always made sure it was there when I started my shift. And I certainly always locked the gate from then on. Thinking about this experience that night, the part that freaked me out the most was that he had to have waited around for me to leave for about 2 hours just to do that laugh. He didn't know me. I could have been crazy and the type of person to get mad and try to find and attack him, yet he didn't seem scared or to care while he tried to mess with me. For some random dude, this is probably a story he tells from his point of view to make all his friends giggle hysterically, but for me, that dude, the one I call Angel in the Snow Guy. To add to the winter theme, a friend of mine has a creepy story. This happened about a year ago on a camping trip to Kentucky in the winter. My girlfriend at the time and 3 of my buddies spent the long weekend doing some hiking and camping. We drove in on a Friday night around midnight and set up camp. There was almost no one else at this campsite besides a young couple a bit down the road from us and an older man down the road the other way. We unloaded the cars in the dark, got the headlamps out, and started setting up the tents. All of a sudden, my GF noticed that we had an extra person amongst us. It was the young woman from the couple at the campsite down the road. She looked really messed up. Her eyes were glazed and her skin looked like she had been picking at it constantly. She introduced herself and spoke in a sort of monotonous way. Overall, she seemed nice, but it's her BF, or husband, who really creeped us out. We noticed after talking with her for a bit that he was standing near our campsite at the edge of the woods just staring at us. Eventually he went back to their campsite, but then got his car and pulled right up to us with his high beams on. As you can imagine, getting blasted by high beams at midnight in the middle of the woods really impairs your ability to see. His GF said she had to go and got into the car with him. At this point we were all weirded out, but not freaked out. It was later in the night when things got scary. I was in the tent with my GF when I started to hear a domestic argument from the couple down the road. It soon escalated to full screaming. Then, I heard the sound of glass break. At this point my GF and I are sitting up and deciding if we should do something. I hear someone get into the car. The car then peels out of the campsite and races down the dirt road past our campsite, kicking up dirt and gravel against the side of our tent. The guy had apparently left his GF in the campsite because we could hear her sobbing. My GF and I start getting dressed so we can check out the situation. But the car comes peeling back up the road and parks back at the campsite. Loud panicked shouting ensues, and we hear two clear pops that sound exactly like gunshots. I remember the feeling of the blood draining from my face. My GF and I are basically frozen in our tent, listening. Finally, to our great relief, we hear them both start arguing again. The argument settles down by about 4 in the morning, and we fall asleep. When we woke up, they were gone. I asked my buddies if they heard what happened, and they said it kept them up as well. We made breakfast and started packing up when the older man from the trailer walked over and started chatting with us. He seemed surprised that my GF was with me, and said something along the lines of, "You shouldn't have brought her, it's not safe for women here." Needless to say, we were officially creeped, and we found a new area of the state park to stay. We found a lovely lakeside campsite the next night and enjoyed the rest of the trip, but we were certainly jarred by the encounters. So, abusive man from the woods in Kentucky, I can officially say let's not meet ever again, and hopefully your GF has gotten away from you too.